Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. This week, we are in Parshat Bo, which is found in the book of Exodus, beginning with chapter 10, verse 1. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute at this time, we can all share in the recitation of our blessing, giving thanks for this opportunity to be together within Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher shanu mitzvotav v'tzi banu la'asot divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. We will share in reading the English translation of our Torah portion, and then I'll share with you a focused study related to this week's Torah portion. Then we'll open it up for our collaborative conversation. If you'd like to go ahead and go back on mute, we'll begin reading. I'll begin, and then we have several people around the table here in our home, and then I'll invite those who are on Zoom to have an opportunity to read as well. So we begin with Book of Exodus, chapter 10, verse 1. Then Adonai said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of courtiers, in order that I may display these my signs among them, and that you may recount in the hearing of your children and your children's children how I made a mockery of the Egyptians and how I displayed my signs among them, in order that you may know that I am Adonai." So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "Thus says Adonai, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may worship me. For if you refuse to let my people go, tomorrow I will bring locusts on your territory. They shall cover the surface of the land so that no one will be able to see the land. They shall devour the surviving remnant that was left to you after the hail, and they shall eat away all your trees that grow in the field. Moreover, they shall fill your palaces and the houses of all your courtiers and of all the Egyptians, something that neither your fathers nor your fathers' fathers have seen from the day they appeared on earth to this day." With that, he turned and left Pharaoh's presence. Richard, would you like to read a little, beginning at verse 7?
Yes, thank you very much. Pharaoh's courtiers said to him, "How long shall this one be a snare to us? Let the men go to worship the God, the Lord their God. Are you not aware that Egypt is lost?" So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and he said to them, "Go, worship the Lord your God." "Who are the ones to go?" Moses replied. "We will all go, young and old. We will go with our sons and daughters, our flocks and herds, for we must observe the Lord's pilgrimage." But he said to them, "The Lord will be with you the same as I mean to let your children go with you. Clearly, you are bent on mischief. No, you menfolk go and worship the Lord, since that is what you want." And they were expelled from Pharaoh's presence.
Thank you, Richard. Sherry, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 12?
Thank you. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Hold out your arm over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat up all the grasses in the land, whatever the hail has left." So Moses held out his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord drove an east wind over the land all that day and all that night. And when morning came, the east wind had brought the locusts. Locusts invaded all the land of Egypt and settled within all the territory of Egypt in a thick mass. Never before had there been so many, nor will there ever be so many again. They hid all the land from view, and the land was darkened. And they ate up all the grasses of the field and all the fruit of the trees, which the hail had left, so that nothing green was left of tree or grass of the field in all the land of Egypt.
Thank you, Sherry. Steve, would you like to read a bit, beginning at verse 16?
Thank you. Pharaoh hurriedly summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "I stand guilty before the Lord your God, and before you. Forgive my offenses just this once, and plead with the Lord your God that he remove this debt from me. So he left Pharaoh's presence and pleaded with the Lord. The Lord caused a shift to very strong west wind, which lifted the locusts and hurled them into the sea of reeds. Not a single locust remained in all the territory of Egypt, but the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go.
Thank you. Tony, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 21?
Then Adonai said to Moses, hold out your arm toward the sky, that there may be darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched. Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one could get up from where he was. But all the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings.
Why don't you continue? Thank you.
Pharaoh then summoned Moses and said, go worship the Lord. Only your flocks and your herds shall be left behind. Even your children may go with you. But Moses said, you yourself must provide us with sacrifices and burnt offerings to offer up to Adonai our God. Our own livestock too shall go along with us. Not a hoof shall remain behind. For we must select from it for the worship of Adonai our God, and we shall not know with what we are to worship Adonai until we arrive there. But Adonai stiffened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not consent to let them go. Pharaoh said to him, be gone from me. Take care not to see me again, for the moment you look upon my face, you shall die. And Moses replied, you have spoken rightly. I shall not see your face again.
Thank you so much. June, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 11?
Thank you, Rabbi. And the Lord said unto Moses, yet one plague more will I bring upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterwards he will let you go hence. Where he shall let you go, he shall surely thrust you out hence altogether. Speak now in the ears of the people, and let them ask every man of his neighbor and every woman of her neighbor jewels of silver and jewels of gold. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants and in the sight of the people.
Thank you so much, June. Let me invite Margot. Would you like to read beginning at verse 4?
Yes, carefully. Moses said, thus says the Lord, toward midnight I will go forth among the Egyptians, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstones, and all firstborns of the cattle. And there shall be a loud cry in all the land of Egypt, such as has never been or will ever be again. But not a dog shall snarl at any of the Israelites, at man or beast, in order that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. Then all these courtiers of yours shall come down to me and bow low before me, saying, depart you and all the people who follow you. After that, I will depart. And he left Pharaoh's presence in hot anger. Now the Lord had said to Moses, Pharaoh will not heed you, in order that my marvels may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron had performed all these marvels before Pharaoh, but it was the Lord, but the Lord had stiffened the heart of Pharaoh so that he would not let the Israelites go from his land.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Jay, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 12?
Thank you, Rabbi. Adonai said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. speak to the whole community of Israel and say that on the 10th of this month, each of them shall take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. But if the household is too small for a lamb, let him share one with a neighbor who dwells nearby in proportion to the number of persons. You shall contribute for the lamb according to what each household will eat. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a yearling male. You shall take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep watch over it until the 14th day of the month, and all the assembled congregation of the Israelites shall slaughter it at twilight. They shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they are to eat it. They shall eat the flesh that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or cooked in any way with water, but roasted, head, legs, and entrails over the fire. You shall not leave any of it over until morning. If any of it is left until morning, you shall burn it.
Thank you so much. And Dave, would you like to read the start of verse 11?
This is how you shall eat it. Your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. It is a Passover offering to the Lord. For that night I will go through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and I will mete out punishments to all the gods of Egypt. I, the Lord. And the blood on these houses where you are staying shall be a sign for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, so that no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt.
Thank you so much, Dave. Paul, would you like to read at the start of verse 14? And you'll need to unmute, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. This day shall become a remembrance for you, and you shall celebrate it as a festival for Hashem, for your generations. As an eternal decree shall you celebrate it. For a 7-day period shall you eat matzahs, but on the previous day you shall nullify the leaven from your homes. For anyone who eats leavened food, that soul shall be cut off from Israel, from the 1st day to the 7th day. On the first day shall be a holy convocation, and on the 7th day shall be a holy convocation for you. No work may be done on them, except for what must be eaten for any person. Only that may be done for you. You shall safeguard the matzahs, for on this very day I will have taken your legions out of the land of Egypt. You shall observe the day for your generations as an eternal decree. In the 1st month, on the 14th day of the month, in the evening, shall you eat matzahs, until the 21st day of the month in the evening. For 7 days, leaven may not be found in your houses. For anyone who eats leavening, that soul shall be cut off from the assembly of Israel, whether a convert or a native of the land. You shall not eat any leavening. In all your dwellings shall you eat matzahs.
Thank you so much, Paul. And Jim, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 21?
Thank you, Rabbi. Moses then summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go pick out lambs for your families and slaughter the Passover offering. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and apply some
Jim?
Yeah, I'm trying to do this with one hand.
Okay.
What was it that I left off?
Why don't you start with verse 22?
Some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and to the two doorposts. None of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning. For when Adonai goes through to smite the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the lintel and two doorposts, and Adonai will pass over the door and not let the destroyer enter and smite your home.
Thank you so much, Jim. Mark Thompson, would you like to read at the start of verse 24?
Sure, thank you. You shall observe this as an institution for all time, for you and for your descendants. And when you enter the land that Adonai will give you, as he has promised, you shall observe this rite. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this rite? You shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice to Adonai, because he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but saved our houses. The people then bowed low in homage, and the Israelites went and did so, just as Adonai had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did.
Thank you so much. Mark Levinstein, would you like to read at verse 29?
Thank you. In the middle of the night, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And Pharaoh arose in the night with all his courtiers and all the Egyptians, because there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was no house where there's not someone dead. He summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, up, depart from among my people, you and the Israelites with you. Go worship the Lord as you said. Take also your flocks and your herds as you said, and be gone. May you bring a blessing upon me also.
Thank you, Mark. David and Susan, would you like to read starting at verse 33?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Where are we?
Verse 33.
Okay. And Egypt bore down on the people to hurry to send them off from the land. For they said, we are all dead men. And the people carried off their dough before it rose, their kneading pans wrapped in their cloaks on their shoulders. And the Israelites had done according to Moses' word, and they had asked of the Egyptians ornaments of silver and ornaments of gold and cloaks. And the Lord had granted the people favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, who lent to them, and they despoiled Egypt.
And the children of Israel traveled from Ramesses to Sukkot, about 600,000 on foot. Men, apart from their infants, and also a great mixture had gone up with them, and sheep and oxen, a very heavy livestock. And they baked the dough that they had brought out of Egypt, cakes of unleavened bread, because it had not leavened, because they were driven from Egypt and were not able to delay, and they also had not made provisions for themselves.
Thank you so much, both of you. Catherine, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 40?
Thank you, Rabbi. The length of time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430th year, that very day, all the ranks of Adonai departed from the land of Egypt. That was for the Lord a night of vigil to bring them out of the land of Egypt. That same night is Adonai's, one of the vigil for all the children of Israel throughout the ages.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Robin, would you like to read at verse 43?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Adonai said to Moses and Aaron, this is the law of the Passover offering. No foreigner shall eat of it, but any householder's purchased male slave may eat of it once he has been circumcised. No bound or hired laborer shall eat of it. It shall be eaten in one house. You shall not take any of the flesh outside the house, nor shall you break a bone of it. The whole community of Israel shall offer it. If a male stranger who dwells with you would offer the Passover to Adonai, all his males must be circumcised. Then he will be admitted to offer it. He shall then be as a citizen of the country, but no uncircumcised man may eat of it. There shall be one law for the citizen and for the stranger who dwells among you. And all the Israelites did so, as Adonai had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. That very day, Adonai freed the Israelites from the land of Egypt, troop by troop.
Thank you, Robin. Robert, would you like to read a little bit at the start of chapter 13 in the book of Exodus?
You know, my version is different. I looked for yours. I couldn't find it.
That's fine.
I'm enjoying it, though. I'm enjoying it.
Okay. All right. So we're all reading from slightly different versions.
Oh, okay. So where do you want me to start again?
At the very start of chapter 13.
Yes. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, sanctify unto me all the firstborn, whatsoever openeth the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and of beast, it is mine. And Moses said unto the people, remember this day in which ye came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by strength of hand the Lord brought you out from this place. There shall no leavened bread be eaten. This day came ye out in the month of Abib. And it shall be when the Lord shall bring thee into the land of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, which he swore unto thy fathers to give thee, a land flowing with milk and honey, that thou shalt keep this service in this month.
Thank you so much, Robert. Let me invite Justin at verse 6.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Rabbi. For 7 days you shall, no, wait a second, this,
Yes.
Okay, verse 6, for 7 days you shall eat unleavened cakes. And on the 7th day there is a festival for the Lord. Unleavened cakes shall be eaten during the 7 days, and no leaven shall be seen of yours in your possession, and no leavening shall be seen of yours throughout all of your borders. And you shall tell your son on that day, saying, because of this, the Lord did this for me, and when I went out of Egypt. And it shall be to you as a sign upon your hand and as a remembrance between your eyes, in order that the law of the Lord shall be in your mouth. For with a mighty hand the Lord took you out of Egypt. And you shall keep this statute at its appointed time from year to year. And it will come to pass when the Lord will bring you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and to your forefathers, and he has given it to you, that you shall give over to the Lord whatever opens the womb, and every miscarriage that opens the womb of an animal which will be yours. The males belong to the Lord. And every firstborn donkey you shall redeem with a lamb. And if you do not redeem it, you shall decapitate it. And every firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. And it will come to pass, if your son asks you in the future, saying, what is this? You shall say to him, with a mighty hand did the Lord take us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh was too stubborn to let us out, the Lord slew every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I slaughter for a sacrifice all males that opened the womb, and every firstborn of my sons I will redeem. And it shall be a sign for you, a sign upon your hand, and for ornaments between your eyes. For with a mighty hand did the Lord take us out of Egypt.
Thank you so much, Justin. Thank you so much, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion reading for this week. I'd like to share with you a little bit of focus study. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out now. And as I was studying the portion this week, of course, what really dominates is this is the climax and the conclusion to this series of plagues that's been inflicted upon Egypt, the body of Egypt. And as I was thinking about that, I kind of turned to reading about many different cultures that have notions about dangers and plagues being inflicted upon a populace and how the populace addresses those dangers. And one jumped out at me in particular, and that's from the Buddhist tradition. And there is a story about a Buddhist goddess named Tara, who is assigned and devoted to protecting human beings from certain elemental fears or dangers that impact them. And in particular, there's a reading within a Buddhist text that talks about Tara, the goddess, protecting human beings from 8 particular fundamental dangers or fears. And I thought about this, and I thought this is very intriguing, the notion that people are being afflicted with a series of fears or dangers, and there's some kind of protective being for human beings. So that is what this graphic here, it's from I think late 18th, I believe it's late 19th century, sorry, from the Kham province in Tibet, an image of the goddess Tara protecting from the 8 fears. And these 8 fears that she is protecting human beings from have both a physical dimension to them and a spiritual dimension to them. That is, these are dangers that are both outside in the world, and they have corresponding fears that occupy the interior life of human beings. So here are the 8 external dangers that she is seeking to protect people from: lions, elephants, fire, serpents, robbers, water, plagues, and demons. And the corresponding spiritual or internal dimensions of these dangers are pride or ego, ignorance, anger, envy, wrong thinking, attachment, avarice, and doubt. And when I read this, I thought, all these years I've read the story about the plagues, and I've just imagined them as these external physical dangers that are being imposed upon the body of Egypt. And I thought, well, what if there's another way to think about this? What if there's a way to think about this as the Buddhist teaching is reminding us, which is that there's also dangers and plagues, if you want to call them, that are operative within the human being as well, that need to be addressed. So that's a little bit what we're going to be exploring to see if there is some way for the Jewish tradition and the Buddhist tradition, and many other cultures indeed, to have some kind of synchronicity. So I've entitled this study session, Confronting the Great Serpent, and we'll see how the Great Serpent makes an appearance within the course of our study. We begin by looking at an opening verse, the opening verse from our Torah portion, which is number 1 here on the study sheet, and in Hebrew it's Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Bo el Paro, which can be translated as God said to Moses, go to Pharaoh. But there's a provocation for a lot of our commentators. They look at that word bo and they wonder, well, bo doesn't really mean go. That would be lech, as in lech lecha, go forth. Bo really means come. And so there's a kind of a lot of wondering about why is the word come being used here. And as I studied that little bit of provocation, I said, really, is it so unusual that the word come is being used here rather than go? And I looked back through earlier chapters in the book of Exodus, especially when it comes to the time in Egypt. And the word bo is used at least 3 other times in reference to Moses moving towards Pharaoh. So it's not as if the word bow hasn't been used before within this context of God instructing Moses to go forth to meet with Egypt, to Pharaoh. So I'm wondering, why are the commentators kind of raising the issue at this point about this word bow rather than having done so earlier? So that's what we're going to explore a little bit. And our first commentator is the wonderful mystical text, the Zohar. And this is what the Zohar says. Why does it say, bow, come to Pharaoh? It should have said, lech, go to Pharaoh. God brought Moses into a chamber within a chamber, to the supernal and mighty serpent, from which many levels evolve, which Moses feared to approach. When the Blessed Holy One saw that Moses was afraid, the Blessed Holy One waged war against Pharaoh. So this is a part of a little bit of a more expanded story that's being told in the Zohar, that's in response to this verse, go or come to Pharaoh. And what's happening when the more expanded story is that the main protagonist in the Zohar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, is now telling a story that what this is really telling us is that God is guiding Moses through various chambers of the demonic realm into its highest rung. And Shimon Bar Yochai says, and at the highest rung is the Great Serpent. And the Great Serpent is identified as being Pharaoh. And so there's this story that's being told of Moses being guided by God through these different chambers, deeper and deeper into the very essence of Pharaoh, if you will, who is now Moses is now confronting at the most essential aspect of evil, represented by this great serpent and represented in human form by Pharaoh. So what is it about the great serpent and what's going on here? Well, there's another reference to this notion about the serpent, the great serpent, and that is from the prophet Ezekiel. And that's quoted here in number 2. From the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 29. Thus says the eternal God, I'm going to deal with you, O Pharaoh, king of Egypt, mighty sea serpent, sprawling in your streams, who said, my Nile is my own, I made it for myself. And then in this description in prophet Ezekiel, what happens next is God says, I'm going to grab you, O great sea serpent. I'm going to pull you out of the water. I'm going to throw you onto the desert. I'm going to flay you and you'll be consumed by birds of prey. What is it that is so disturbing to God about Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and is identified as the mighty sea serpent? What is Pharaoh doing here? And so Ezekiel has Pharaoh quoted as saying, my Nile is my own, I made it for myself. So there are a couple of aspects to what is so terrible about what Pharaoh is saying here. One thing he's saying, I made the Nile. Well, if that's all it said, well, what we'd have there is an issue about Pharaoh, in a sense, proclaiming his own divinity and therefore setting himself up in opposition to God. But there's something else that's going on in what is portrayed as Pharaoh having said, I made it for myself. You know, if Pharaoh had said, I made the Nile and I made it for my people, so they would have lush soil in which to grow things. Well, then you'd have one divinity in opposition to another divinity, but at least the Pharaoh divinity would have been doing something good for his people. But here, what seems to be so wicked, so evil, if you will, is that he says, I made it for myself. It's all for me. I exercise my power for myself, for my own well-being. That seems to be what is particularly evil about what Pharaoh is doing here. This notion about in the Zohar about going into chamber after chamber, going into some kind of cave. The notion of the cave in all kinds of stories and mythologies, that's quite familiar, going into the darkness of the cave. If you have the study sheet, I invite you to turn over and we'll look to see how it appears in a pretty contemporary mythological saga. And that's number 3. In the movie, The Empire Strikes Back, if you recall, what happens in one aspect of that movie is Luke Skywalker goes to visit Yoda, his mentor, his spiritual mentor, on the planet Dagobah to complete his spiritual training, if you will, his Jedi training. And his reason for completing his Jedi training is so that he can fulfill his mission, which is to destroy the evil empire and to return balance to the universe. And so when he meets up with Yoda, Yoda takes him to this cave. And Luke Skywalker becomes rather distressed, a little bit anxious, because he senses that there's something quite evil inside this cave. And Yoda says, "In you must go." And Luke Skywalker says, "What's in there?" And Yoda says, "Only what you take with you." And if you recall, Luke goes into this dark, dark place. And Yoda had said to him, "Don't take any weapons with you." But Luke was so worried, so frightened, he did take weapons with him. And he confronts this evil being that's clearly in body form, Darth Vader, but in face form is Luke Skywalker. And later in the saga, what happens is this moment in the cave is acknowledged as a deep failure on the part of Luke Skywalker. Why? Because he took his weapon with him, in spite of the fact that Yoda had said, "No weapons, just take yourself." When I read that, I don't want to get too extrapolative in terms of trying to compare the Star Wars to Torah, but it did make me think of that episode that we'll be reading about sometime later, the second appearance of Moses at the rock, where if you recall, God said to Moses, "Speak to the rock and water will come out." And instead, what Moses does is he takes a weapon, his staff, and he hits the rock with it. And that's considered to be the great failure that Moses commits and precludes him from being able to enter the promised land. But here is this notion about going into this cave where the object is not for Luke so much to meet this external enemy and defeat it, but what Luke is supposed to do is to go into this cave to confront his own fears. And that's what Yoda means when he says, when you go in there, what's in there, there's nothing in there except you. And that's what you're going to confront. You're going to confront yourself. You're not going to be confronting some terrible external being. You're going to be confronting your own being. And you're going to have to confront your own fears, your own anxieties, and your own dark self. And that's what you need to overcome if you're to fulfill your mission. So now turn to the Sutra of Tara, which is what the front page graphic was representing. And it's interesting that the word sutra means thread. So that which holds things together. So we have in the Buddhist tradition, the name for a sacred text is a sutra. And it got me to thinking that a name for a sacred text in the Jewish tradition is Megillah, a scroll. And so we excuse me, we have in the one hand, the sutra that which binds things together, which gives us wisdom. And in the Jewish tradition, we have the Megillah, which means to roll over. And that's how we experience a sacred text, something that rolls over. So here is just a very brief portion of the Sutra of Tara. Beasts are dumb and stupid. One eats another. Up weary paths, down cliffs they climb and fall. In panic, terror-stricken, trembling with fear, full of caution, one cannot conceive their sufferings. In Mahayana Buddhism, this is the recitation of the Sutra of Tara is part of a spiritual practice. To recite this over and over, and perhaps to fortify oneself for confronting whatever dangers, fears that we might encounter, not just in the outside world, perhaps more significantly within the interior world that we all carry with us. I'd like to share with you, in terms of pursuing this theme about fears and confronting our fears, a poem by the great Lebanese poet Kahil Gibran. Kahil Gibran was a Maronite Christian. However, he was also strongly influenced by and quite respectful of Baha'i and also of Sufism. And this is a poem he wrote called Fear. It is said that before entering the sea, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has traveled from the peaks of the mountains, the long winding road crossing forests and villages. And in front of her, she sees an ocean so vast that to enter there seems nothing more than to disappear forever. But there is no other way. The river cannot go back. Nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean, because only then will fear disappear, because that's where the river will know. It's not about disappearing into the ocean, but of becoming the ocean. So I asked this question at the beginning. Why is the Zohar raising this issue about the word bow at this point when it's been used before? I think it's because we're now at the climax and conclusion of the plagues episodes. We've just read the last 3 plagues: locusts, darkness, where people cannot even see one another, and then finally, death. Death of that which represents the future of the Egyptian people. And then what happens next is Moses is to lead the people of Israel out from Egypt. So I want to suggest that why the Zohar is kind of raising the issue about bow at this point when it's been used before, and it begins to then tell the story about what's happening is that Moses is now going deep into the dark cave to encounter the consummate evil that there is. And it turns out the evil is not just something outside of Moses. I want to suggest it's the fear that Moses is carrying within himself, because Moses, since infancy, grew up in the palace. He grew up in the house of Pharaoh. And if Moses is to lead the people forward, he needs to confront all those fears, all those attachments to ego, all that repressed growing up that he's now carrying with him from the house of Pharaoh. He needs to confront that, because Pharaoh is not just outside of himself, Pharaoh dwells within himself. And that, I suggest, is what the Zohar is trying to point out. Moses is now confronting his own fears. So he goes into these chambers. He sees the consummation of evil and perhaps remembers, yes, I know that Pharaoh. I sat next to that Pharaoh. I fought alongside that Pharaoh. I assimilated that Pharaoh. And now I need to expunge that Pharaoh from me if I'm going to lead others out of slavery and into freedom. And I want to suggest that what this commentary is teaching us is that we all carry within us urges and desires, and sometimes we misplace the object of what that desire is. And so he's going into this dark place in order to confront this these urges and these powers and these inclinations he has. And he has to separate out the urge, the power, and the inclination he carries within him from a misplaced object of it. And to separate out the object of this power that I carry within me is not to create a Nile for myself. I carry this power within me in order to cross the Nile, in order to go out into an expanse of freedom and new possibilities. So with that, I'd love to hear what came up for you, your own thoughts, your own provocations, your questions, your thoughts and your reflections. If you raise your hand, I'd love to call upon you. Mark Thompson.
Thanks, Rabbi. A couple of things come to mind. I was doing a little research myself on the Torah, and one of the elements of the 8 is the plague, and its internal association is with avarice.
Right.
So when you were talking about Pharaoh saying the Nile is mine, this is a perfect example of avarice, and that the end effect was plague. So now I'm thinking about current times and wondering whether the plague that we've inflicted upon ourselves is a result of our own avarice in some way. Just a thought.
Yeah.
The second thing is I love the use of bo as opposed to lech, because for me, bo is more of a welcoming. It's as if God is welcoming Moses to confront his fears. He says, come, let's do this together. I'm going to be your Pharaoh, and we're going to face this together. And to me, so it's inspirational because it allows us to view Moses sort of like a coming of age story where we can internalize it and become Moses ourselves. How can we recognize, confront our own fears and move on from there?
Lovely. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you. And others? Richard?
A couple things too. Yeast, leaven, is about the ego. And Passover, my text says offers for Passover offering, offers protective offering. And that's what Tara is a protector. And this this ping pong game between Moses and Pharaoh has got me again. And Moses is able to swagger in and change the wind and do this stuff, but God hardens Pharaoh's heart because he's letting Moses know, you're going to come to a place with a stick and you're going to fool. And I'm trying to train you not to do that. And so you're going to see that you don't have the power, God does. And that at the end, when he releases everybody, that's the same time that all the wombs are open. So this is the true birth of the Israelites happening here. And the Moses, at the end there, Pharaoh says, go, Gay, Vedaleg, take them all out there, do your thing. and take your animals and take your kids and do it all and say a blessing for me. So what happened to Pharaoh? Come to Pharaoh, get in there and find out how do you humble yourself, because he just did it. So take an example from Pharaoh and you can all go and have a nice life. And Pharaoh and the Egyptians, that generation is gone because he kills all those people, all the firstborns. We know later on, Nebuchadnezzar comes down and wipes out Egypt, and that transforms down there. But the Israelites now, they're over there at the Jordan still waiting to get on with their business. But I think this is the birth of the Israelite people. And it's Moses learning that, no, you're going to learn it from Babel. You're going to learn it at the rock. This is a perennial problem in eternity for people. To every year, you got to get rid of you got to do something about getting rid of this leaven and puffing yourselves up.
Thank you. Thank you so much for reminding us about that notion about chametz being that which puffs us up and that being associated with the ego. Thank you. Catherine, go ahead and unmute and share with us. Oh, you have to unmute, Catherine.
I was struck on the study sheet by this image of Pharaoh claiming the Nile to be his own. And yet here we have, it's a river. The Nile is a river. And no matter what he says, the river is going to flow, and it's going to flow toward the sea. And so I was thinking that that's such a powerful metaphor for the Israelites themselves, saying, this is mine, and taking leave with the unleavened bread. So that was just, that metaphor just is so powerful.
Thank you, guys. It's very powerful. I find it very powerful too. And it brings up this song that I've sometimes sung about the river is flowing and God carrying me down to the sea, rather than imagining ourselves as either the creator of it or trying to alter its course. To be in the flow of the river and heading towards the ocean. Yeah, it's a very powerful image. Thank you. And others, Jay Iser?
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi. I'm noting the, I don't know what email that you call it, that you sent 3 days ago, the January 4th email, when you talk about ruling elites have often intentionally invoked in those they govern, the fear of others as a means of social control and as a way of staying in power. And you go through this thing about the fear. The thing that comes to mind is this nation in our current state. I believe it's about 40 years. I'm not going to mention the actor president that began this whole thing, but you can just hypothesize the name from that. But it's interesting that it is a form of power, but it also acts as a drug. It acts as like an opiate to this fear, and Pharaoh falls victim to that. And what it really indicates, and I see this with the leaders, many leaders, it indicates an insecurity on their part. I think that inside they're fearful little helpless children themselves, and they have to manifest this greatness in order to keep things their way. That's my comment on this.
Thank you so much, Jay. Thank you. And others who have some thoughts. Steve?
Yeah, you mentioned sutra. What does that mean?
Well, sutra means thread, and it's the term that's used for a sacred Buddhist text. Yeah.
But what does Kama Sutra mean? I've heard of that.
Yeah, Kama Sutra is a particular sacred text. Yeah, yeah. All right. So, but I love the notion that what's called a text is the word that's used for that which binds us together, if you will, binds something together. Justin, would you like to share with us?
Yes, please, Rabbi. Just the term Tara it means star. And so a star is a guide. And I do think of Rosenzweig's text, The Star of Redemption. And I just wanted to acknowledge, that's part of what he culminates his work in terms of this, of a star. And I, respecting Judaism, to add neither more nor less to what is being offered, but that Rosenzweig locates that sense of the star, the guiding element being the eternal truth.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you so much for bringing Rosenzweig's great work into our conversation. That's lovely. David or Susan, would you like?
I look, Rabbi, by the way, I looked it up. It's Kama Sutra means teachings on desire.
Yes.
Or desire is the Kama.
Thank you.
Whatever.
There's a Moksha Sutra too, which would be in the teachings on liberation, and that would be a different way of approaching rather than that.
Thank you both so much. That's wonderful. David?
It was me. I had two comments. One I consider pretty semi-minor, and that is my recent reading indicates that Pesach, that Passover is not a good translation of the word Pesach. That Pesach's rooted in the idea of protection. So probably protection is a better translation of what we are talking about in the story of God passing over the doors. I did want to also make a hopefully short comment that is that I like even more on what Catherine said, and which is the river flows into the sea. The river ends back up in the undifferentiated, in the wholeness of things that aren't rational, et cetera, et cetera. So how can anybody own the river even when they hadn't built Aswan Dam yet? But the river Serpent doesn't flow out to the sea unless he wants to become a sea serpent. And it's the river Serpent really is what Pharaoh has made or become. So thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for that clarification. And also, you've added so much to my own appreciation now for Passover, because to think about the Passover Seder as a spiritual exercise in protection is a very wonderful way for me to think about it. And what are we doing? What exactly is the nature of that spiritual exercise? It's gathering everyone around the table and telling a story, which is what we just read in this portion, which is, I'm doing all this so you can tell a story. There's something about the telling of the story, which is a form of protection for us in order to move forward into the future. It's a lovely, lovely insight you've provided for me. Thank you so much, David. And Robert, would you like to share with us?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you again. Absolutely delightful. So this thing about come to Pharaoh I've been pondering this because of the points you made. So Pharaoh is a king. This is just my understanding. Pharaoh is a king, but he is allowed to serve at the pleasure of the King of Kings, who is God. So in a sense, if you will, it is God saying to Moses, come to Pharaoh, he rules at my pleasure. He serves at my pleasure. I have given him that station at my pleasure. And then the second thing that comes to mind is the river. Well, the river is water. Water is what gives life materially, but spiritually what gives life is the word of God. Whether we're Jews or Baha'is or Christians or Buddhists, it's our scripture that gives us life and feeling and love and all these things. So here, in a way, we're saying, I see Pharaoh saying is, I am God. I have created my own word. It is my word that feeds my people. I have not joined partners with you, God. I have exceeded you because they feed On my word, your word is subservient. And a serpent is that which is closest to the ground than anything. And you mentioned it in our attachments. And I'm thankful to God that we have eternity to work on those.
Thank you so much. I'm so intrigued and fascinated by how so many of us, we're all kind of fascinated with this image of the river and the flowing. And within Hasidic text, there's great emphasis placed on that early verses from the story of creation with a river flowing from the Garden of Eden, which is going to nurture us all. And this is what gives rise to, within Kabbalah, this notion about there's this emanation, this flowing down from the source of all life. And if we unblock the channels, then we are recipients of this emanation that's constantly flowing through us. However, we also have the capacity to block up channels, in which case we become contorted, unwell human beings. So the choice is always theirs. And it seems as if Pharaoh represents that character who is insistent that the flowing didn't come from someone else, it came from me. I'm the one in charge of this flow, and I can direct it wherever I want. I can do whatever I want with it, and it's all for my own purpose. And we see that that's the character and the trait, if you will, that ends up non-existent eventually, just non-existent. Any other reflections, thoughts? Anyone? Sherry, yes, and then we'll conclude. Thank you.
Rabbi, last week you talked about, I made a note about seeking the Pharaoh within each one of us.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if you would expand upon that a little bit more this week.
Well, within the Jewish spiritual tradition, this material that we're reading is not just talking about an external dimension with things that are happening out in the world. It's also describing an interior story as well. And so we're being given guidance and practices in order to have as positive an outcome to the story as possible, the story of our own lives. And so, as Richard pointed out, when we come to Passover, we don't eat leavened bread because that's our way of saying what we're supposed to do is get rid of, minimize the ego's influence on us. And Pharaoh is that force within us that just wants to control everything, primarily out of a sense of fear, which is what we're talking about tonight. And so Passover, in that sense, is a way to live out that story. It's a bit of psycho-spiritual drama that we're supposed to live out. And we're supposed to confront the Pharaoh inside of us, which wants to like control everything. No, you can't read the Seder story. I'm going to read the whole Seder story. So we all encounter these beings around the table. And then when we look closely, we see all those beings have some life existence within us as well. The anxieties, the fears, the sense of isolation, the desire to control in order to overcome those fears and anxieties. And so we read this book, not just to read a story from a detached point of view. Oh, look at what's happening with these people. We read this story as part of a spiritual practice in order to make ourselves better human beings for the sake of the world. With that, I want to express gratitude for each and every one of you who comes together to immerse ourselves in these moments of self-recreation of ourselves in partnership, in companionship, in Havruta with one another. We help one another focus on the work that needs to be done to become better people for the sake of the world. I'm so grateful to each and every one of you. Thank you all very much. Be well. God bless you all. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.